Okay, hello. I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission on Wednesday, July 10th, 2024. Ms. Dow, could you do the roll call?
Chair Chang,
Present.
Vice Chair Rectal,
Here.
Commissioner Aiken,
Here.
Commissioner Heckman,
Present and pleased to announce my non-candidacy for City Council.
Commissioner Liu,
Present.
Commissioner Suma. Here. Commissioner Templeton. Here. We have a quorum.
All right, our first order of business is public comment. Ms. Dow, are there any comment cards?
I have no request to speak.
Okay, and I don't see anything online. All right, so on to agenda changes, additions, and deletions.
There are no changes.
Okay, great. Ms. French, could you start us off with city official reports?
Affirmative. Here we go. Good evening. Amy French, Chief Planning Official. On the screen, I'm showing a couple of notes from the Office of Transportation. This afternoon, I believe, we sent you the May collision report through email. There is no payback meeting in July, so that will not be put on wherever it's normally put for a July meeting, since there is no July meeting. That's what I understand. Then also that staff continues to coordinate with Caltrans on the El Camino Real bike lanes project, and staff is currently waiting for Caltrans to issue final plans and a construction schedule. So that's just a update for your upcoming meetings. You can see on the calendar, we do not have July 31st. Recall that we canceled that meeting. The August 14th meeting has several interesting projects that you've been waiting for. The Stream Corridor Ordinance Update, the Dark Skies, that'll be a study session, the Dark Skies and Bird Safe Design Ordinance, and the Retail Study Recommendations. So just to flag that we've received some modifications to the retail study, and our director wanted to come back to the Planning and Transportation Commission. So we're targeting that date to bring those back for further discussion. Then August 28th, we have a PC project, 660 University, and Office of Transportation will be bringing parking programs update. Finally, September 11th, hopefully that's an auspicious day for this particular item, the Housing Incentive Program. So you may have heard that we received a letter from HCD regarding our housing element submittal. I'll let Albert Yang speak to that if you have questions on that. The council is on break right now. As noted last time, we have several items that are anticipated to go to council in August on the screen here. And then we have some items that you'll be seeing that we anticipate taking in September or October to council. So just, again, this is a item 1 official report. So we have just a brief presentation on timing on the RRP rental I'm losing the other R, the rental registry. Okay, program. And so I have a couple of things just to share as far as the timeline. You can see on the screen that there are some dates that are planned. There's supposed to be a council ad hoc housing ad hoc meeting in early August. There's on August 22nd, there's supposed to be a community meeting. And, basically just in a nutshell, the Planning and Transportation Commission looked at this back in May, the rental registry program. And it's since then been twice to the housing ad hoc and 3 times to council, this topic of rental registry program. And so, these comments that Planning Commission made those have been taken into consideration. But what I'll say is when we get to the questions portion of our evening, commissioner questions that come after item 3, I'm happy to receive your questions, and we can get back to y'all. We have started to receive some questions about that information item, and we'll, endeavor to get back with, responses to questions. So just again, looking forward to sharing the portal that's started to be worked on. Those questions that are going to be inputted into the portal are still in development, so they're not ready to share just yet with the Planning and Transportation Commission. So that kind of gives an overview, and then we'll end there and move to the next item. Also, I'll say that for questions of Office of Transportation, we will have a member of Office of Transportation here for questions again after we finish with item 3, because he's here for item 3. So if you have some questions for transportation, you'll have access. Thank you.
Is Mr. Yang going to say something now?
Yes, is Mr. Yang attending? Because I did mention that we have that status update about the HCD. Okay, Albert, take it away.
Sure. So the city posted last Tuesday some updates, minor revisions in response to informal conversations we had with HCD staff about our adopted housing element. And then HCD sent us a letter yesterday informing us that we were very close to being certified, but that there were still 4 minor changes that they wanted to see to our programs. So staff is working on that, and when those minor changes are ready, they will be again posted for a 7-day period, and then we'll hope to hear back from HCD shortly after that.
Great, that is great news. Anybody have any questions? Okay, Commissioner Templeton?
Thank you. So just a clarification, if they're minor, why are they holding up our housing element? Because what we heard when we were submitting it was that everything had been pre-approved.
Yes. So, HCD had always given us the caveat that if they received public comments that raised new issues they hadn't considered, that, that might be something we need to respond to. So apparently they felt that there were still some things after they read the public comments that we needed to address.
I guess I'm trying to figure out why we're classifying them as minor, if it's enough to hold up our housing element.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. We believe they're minor. It's so one of the things was that we addressed in the edits we made last Tuesday was to further explain why we didn't believe that existing leases were an impediment to a use, commercial use turning over to residential redevelopment. So that's not a change in anything that we're planning to do or any of the sites that we've selected. It's just, further explaining and justifying our methodology, right? So that's, we don't see that as a substantive change to our housing element, but it was something that HCD still felt was necessary for them to find that we were in compliance. I would say that because that was not a substantive change, that, our housing element was compliant, even without that change, but this is what HCD is requiring.
Thanks for explaining that. Okay, and the other comment I wanted to make was to Ms. French about the schedule. I will be here at the next meeting. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Could you?
Is mic working?
Yeah.
I will be here at the next meeting.
Okay. Commissioner Liu?
Yes. Yeah, first of all, thank you for going through those extra conversations and the extra feedback loop with HCD. I have a few questions. Just a simple one to start. What's the expected timeline to get the actual HCD approval after we submit the latest red lines? Would that still expect to take 60 days for HCD to comment?
No, they told us that they would prioritize us and to expect about 2 weeks.
Okay. That's great. I want to recap or understand the substantive changes from the May to July red lines. Can you give a recap of that?
Yeah. So again, we don't think that they are substantive, particularly substantive. One of them, I think, kind of the key one was the one I explained earlier, which was further explanation of why we believe that existing commercial uses will turn over.
Mhm.
In addition, there were some sites like the city parking lots and the faith-based institutions where HCD asked us to add a backstop in, which is basically if we weren't seeing progress in those categories halfway through the planning period, that we would swap those sites out for alternative sites. So again, that's not changing what we think is a suitable site or how we're planning to implement our element. It's just a backup plan if things aren't working out the way we expect, which again we would have to do anyway. Let's see. I can't recall off the top of my head what the other ones were. One of them was agreeing to take a look at all of our impact fees rather than what we called out was the park impact fee in the housing element, because that's sort of what we've heard the most about from the community. But we've agreed to evaluate all of our impact fees in terms of economic feasibility. And that's all that's coming to mind right now.
Okay. Thank you. Those were the changes that I tracked as well. Those 3 program changes and also just the extra explanations for processing timelines and site viability. One thing that bothers me somewhat is that for the 3 program changes in the July red lines, they were flagged in previous HCD comment letters and also flagged at the Council PTC joint meeting, right? I think at that time it was difficult to really address those comments because we were assured that behind the scenes there were conversations that HCD's concerns were generally taken care of. But in previous comment letters, they did ask us a couple of times, for example, to commit to reducing impact fees comprehensively, not limited to parks. I'm curious if there's any sense of where that miscommunication may have come from, and if there's any other risk of other points that might not land in the latest red lines.
I think we're also kind of surprised and disappointed that these issues, which we thought we had explained in our conversations with HCD, popped back up in their later comments. So I'm not sure I can, point out why there was that inconsistency or miscommunication.
Okay, thank you. And I had one last question. When will the HCD formal letter be shared, and when will we have a sense of what the extra 4 changes they're requesting are?
Oh, if that's not already up on the Housing Element website, it will be, shortly. There's no reason that's not available.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, we're going to move on to our first action item, which is public hearing quasi judicial Buena Vista Mobile Home Park redevelopment at 3980 El Camino Real. And it's a recommendation on the applicant's request for approval of a vesting tentative map. I'd like to take disclosures. Let's start and just go down the line, starting maybe with Commissioner Liu.
I've visited the Buena Vista site before. I have nothing else to disclose.
I have nothing to disclose.
Nothing to disclose for me either.
No disclosures for me.
No disclosures for me.
The only disclosure I have is that my firm represented the owners of this park back when they sold to the Housing Authority. And I don't think that that's an issue here. Haven't visited the site recently.
No disclosures.
Thank you. Let's start with the staff presentation then.
Good evening, Commissioners. Claire Raybold, Principal Planner. Project before you today is a vesting tentative map for Buena Vista redevelopment. And one second. So the map is for a 2-lot subdivision of an existing 4.5 acre parcel to create a 1.69 acre parcel and a 2.81 acre parcel. And I just wanted to explain, I believe the staff report also notes, tentative map is necessary for funding purposes to facilitate development in a manner that's consistent with the goals of the existing and proposed regulatory agreements for the site. The resulting parcels are code compliant. So really what we're looking for in the vesting tentative map is just that it meets our minimum lot size requirements for each resulting lot and minimum width and depth requirements, which this by far exceeds. And the resulting lots, as I noted, are 1.69 acres, which will be redeveloped with the apartment building, and a 2.81 acre site that would be rehabilitated as a mobile home park through the state HCD. Net lot size, I just wanted to note that the net lot size that are listed each excludes the existing valley water easement along the frontage. Key considerations for the commission tonight are looking at the subdivision map findings for approval, which really look mainly at consistency with the land use designation as well as the zoning of the site. The subdivision map also includes various changes to easements. This includes removal of obsolete easements or references to utility easements that are going to be removed, as well as providing new public and private easements. This includes a sidewalk across the entire frontage of the property and new utility easements. There was a question related to an existing highway easement. So it's referenced as a road or highway easement along the frontage. I do want to clarify that removal is not necessary as part of this map, but it is an obsolete easement, an easement that's dedicated to the county of Santa Clara prior to when this area was annexed in as part of Palo Alto. So it's not part of the map to remove it. It would need to be removed through separate instruments, so through a separate vacation process. It's not necessary to remove, but because it's obsolete, we hope to be able to remove it through separate instrument prior to recording this map. And tonight, staff recommends that the Planning and Transportation Commission take the following action. Recommend approval of the proposed vesting tentative map to the City Council based on findings and subject to conditions of approval. And with that, I'll turn it back to you. The Housing Authority is here tonight. They don't have a formal presentation, but I believe they might want to speak briefly.
Okay, great. Who is Housing Authority? Please come on up and speak.
Thank you very much. Hello, commissioners and city partners. My name is Chris Adakari. I'm a project manager for the Santa Clara County Housing Authority, and we are the developer and owner for the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park. It seems like some of the commissioners are familiar with the park, so happy to hear that. And I am really excited to be here today. Another public meeting is another important milestone to making progress. It's another opportunity for us to engage with the community. So we appreciate that. I also want to say thank you to city staff who have done tremendous work to help advance our project. And Buena Vista is a really special community. When the park was at risk of conversion, residents organized themselves and fought to save the park. As a result of that organizing, in 2017, the Housing Authority, the City of Palo Alto, and the county came together to purchase the park and help prevent the displacement of the existing residents from the city they love and call home. Since then, the Housing Authority has been the park owner, and we have worked to stabilize the park and create a redevelopment plan to ensure the park is positioned to remain a quality, affordable housing community for decades to come. To help come up with a plan, we did extensive community engagement and in partnership with residents, came up with the following goals: a right to return to improved affordable housing, preserving ownership opportunities for those who wish to remain owners, and to improve the amenities and utilities at the park. Those are our guiding principles with the redevelopment. And we are pleased to have come up with a plan that achieves these goals. The manner in which we are doing that is to provide two projects that operate as one: a new all-electric apartment building on one parcel, right next to a fully redeveloped mobile home park on the other. Both sites are to be under a 75-year affordability deed restrictions, and bifurcating the parcel is a straightforward and necessary step that allows the development to proceed as we have planned. I'm joined here virtually by other staff from the Housing Authority, from the architect Van Meter Williams Pollock, and the civil engineer Sandus, as well as several Buena Vista residents who are in the audience today. Us staff are available for any questions you may have. So thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody in the commission have clarifying questions for staff? Commissioner Heckman, then Reckdahl, then Aiken.
Thank you. I have three. The first, on packet page 11, there's a reference to the existing regulatory agreement, which requires that the property maintain at least 100 affordable units, but currently there are only 79. And I was trying to remember back to the time that the property changed hands, and perhaps there were a number of the existing homes at that time that were determined to be uninhabitable and irreparable. And so they were basically taken out of service. And that's how we have 79 now. We're through this series of actions, we're getting back up over 100. But is that the reason why we're below 100 today?
That's consistent with my understanding. I don't know if the Housing Authority has any additional information to add.
That is correct. There was also a portion of the park that we were not able to purchase. We refer to it as the dog leg, and that was also a loss of actual area in the park.
Okay. All right, thank you. Let's see, second question, packet page 12. Third line from the bottom, it says let's see. It refers to the associated development to be constructed on the lot. So this is the apartment building, would contribute to the housing inventory, including 2 affordable housing units. And I just didn't understand that reference to 2, since it's more than 2. But maybe it's because the housing inventory was only counting on 2 there, or is it just a typo that needs to be corrected as this goes to council?
I think it's just a typo. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, in any event, investigate that, and if it needs to be corrected in the staff report to council, please do that.
Sure, yeah.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I think it was
Yeah.
just an error.
Delete the word two.
Yeah.
okay. And this last question is probably for Albert. So in our land use statement of decision and in the staff report, there's a reference to tenant relocation. It looks to me like that is a condition of approval of the streamlined housing development review, not the vesting tentative map. And so really, it's not a topic for us tonight. It's being handled as a part of the process that's not before the PTC. And I just wanted to confirm that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Rechtel?
Okay. The first is a nit on slide 1. I believe your red squares or red rectangles in the wrong spot. It slid over a little. Yeah. So look. Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that.
And the second would be a question for Albert. For both the Grand Avenue teacher and also for the Mitchell Park Place, it was county projects, and so they were not obliged to follow zoning. Is this the same type of situation where the housing authority does not have to follow Pelto zoning?
We didn't investigate that question because Palo Alto has such a large part in this project. I think the housing authority was, as a courtesy at least, just didn't raise that issue and agreed to go consult with us and go through our process.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Aiken?
Thank you. This question is for staff. On packet page 9, we are directed to consider the proposed CEQA exemption. Are you still interested in comments on that?
Yes, please, of course.
Okay, I'll defer until the next round.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Okay, I've got a question. If you look at the vesting tentative map in the lower left, there's a proposed 5-foot sidewalk easement for parcel A. And then most of the other easements are repeated twice once for parcel A and once for parcel B, but I didn't see that one. I didn't see that same easement note repeated for parcel B. So I just wanted to verify that that's a missing typo or something like that.
So I don't think any of them are repeated. It's just where it happens to be referenced. So it is going across the entire property frontage. It's just only referenced at one point typically. And then when you go through the final map process, you provide all the closure calculations that show the exact point of start and end as part of that final map. But it is intended to go all the way across.
Okay, thank you. All right, doesn't look like there's any other, it's not showing up. Do you want to test that right now? Nope. It's not lighting up, but Commissioner Templeton, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just trying to ask the same question, maybe. Can you show the watercolor or the colored pencil slide?
Sure, hold on one second.
When you say frontage, do you mean Los Robles?
Yeah, sorry, Los Robles being the frontage.
Okay. So then it may end up being the same question, Chair.
Sorry, yes, this shifted, but
Do you know?
is this what you're referencing?
No, it's a pencil drawing, colored pencils.
Oh, I'm sorry, I see. This?
Yeah, okay, so that's where the sidewalk is on this. So this road here with the bike lanes is Los Robles?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and does this mean, I'm just sorry, I got really excited. So it's a technical question. We'll get back to the other stuff later, but like, does that mean we're getting painted bike lanes there?
Um,
Or-
There are no changes to the bike lanes that are proposed as part of the project.
Oh, got all
They're
excited. This is a
existing
pretty
bike
drawing.
lanes, Yeah.
Okay, all right, so good. We have a we really don't have that sidewalk there now, and it's quite an interesting place to go for a walk. So that's will be a huge improvement. So I like seeing that. Thank you for explaining that.
Okay. So now I'd like to open it up to public comment. Ms. Dowd, do you have any speaker cards?
No, I have no speaker cards or raised hands.
Oh, well, okay. Hello to everybody out there. I thought that maybe there'd be somebody who wanted to speak. Okay, so then let's bring it back to the commission for discussion and comments. Light it up, please. All right, I've got Commissioner Aiken, then Heckman. Commissioner Aiken, go ahead.
Go ahead. I just wanted to comment on the CEQA exemption. I was really taken aback by the transportation study. In the first respect, because it doesn't analyze VMT at all. And on top of that, it relies on the assumption that up to 35 families that move from a mobile home to an apartment at the very same location are going to cut their daily trip count in half magically. And luckily, this project has a lot of support, and it's unlikely that anyone will try to use this as a delaying tactic. But it sure would have been nice if we could have leveraged the work that was already done for the housing element supplemental EIR, which has not only, I think, enough information to do this, but the significance threshold for VNT is so high, I don't think there's any risk the conclusion would change. But just as a way to make it defensible, I thought that should be pointed out.
Sure, thank you. I'm happy to, I don't know if there was a question in there, but so if you would like me to say anything.
No, it wasn't a question, just an observation and advice.
Carrie wants to have, she's pushing a virtual button.
Thank you, though.
Okay, Commissioner Heckman.
Thank you. I am in support of the staff recommendation. I did have a couple of minor typos to point out on the record of land use, if that moves forward to council. The first one is on packet page 19, section 4, 3 lines from the bottom. There's an extra F in the middle of 61. And then on packet page 36, condition 5, there's a reference to the trash pickup for the townhomes. And I think this was probably, pasted from a townhome development. And so I think that needs to be changed to make it apply to this development. That's it. Thank you. Thanks, staff, for this work, and really excited to see this project and to see the folks that live in this park really being well taken care of. Thank you.
Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you, Chair. So the question I had when looking at the drawing and listening to our conversation about the impact of the development on traffic and all that made me think about the parking. So I walk past this development, this area is parked every day, and there's a lot of parking on the street. And have we thought about that? And like, what would be do people have places to park in the new development design?
Yes, so there's significantly more parking that's being provided on site as part of this redevelopment of the
Awesome.
project.
That's a huge benefit, because like having your car on the street is more likely to get broken into and damaged and things like that. So I think that's a huge benefit, plus the sidewalks. I think there's a lot to like, and really appreciate the attention that everybody has put in from the city, the county, and the neighborhood. So thank you all for doing that. And I'm very supportive as well.
Commissioner Suma?
Thank you, Chair. I am very supportive of the staff recommendation this evening. Interesting comments from my colleagues so far. And I also welcome all the Buena Vista tenants and people helping them that are here this evening. Every time we see this project advance another step, it's really good news for the city of Palo Alto. So that's great. The one thing I wanted to mention, which has nothing to do with the map and stuff, is if some minor adjustments could be made to materials, if it's a possibility, to reduce the heat island effect that's that this looks like it's going to have a problem with, that would be really welcome. So I just, as an encouragement, I don't think anyone wants to hold this project up in any way. So congratulations, another hurdle down.
Okay, I have one more question that I should have asked as a clarifying question. I too am very supportive of this project. So my question is that it talks about 40% of units being provided at to households earning 30% of area median income, 40% provided at a rate affordable to households earning 50%, and the remaining 20% of units would be provided at a rate affordable to households earning 80% AMI. So my question is that going to be split evenly between the apartment units and the mobile homes, or is it being split some other way?
I think it'd be better if Housing Authority could answer that question. If
Okay,
you don't mind.
Mr. Curry.
Let me actually see if anybody from the Housing Authority who's online would like to respond to this. Just wanted to give that opportunity before I do.
Wonderful. Ms. White?
Yes. Hi, good evening, everyone. That is correct. The city and county tri-party regulatory agreement with the Housing Authority will be split evenly between the apartments and the mobile home park at those AMI targeting that you mentioned. 40% at 30% AMI, 40% at 50% AMI, and the remaining 20% at 80% AMI. I will add that we do have some existing residents at Buena Vista that don't fit neatly into those categories. And so there are provisions that all existing residents will have a right to return at Buena Vista. So it may take some time for those exact ratios, 40, 40, 20, to be achieved over time through attrition and things like that.
Great, thank you. That's great news to hear that there's that provision for existing residents. Okay, I don't see any other lights here. Would somebody like to make a motion? Go ahead,
I
Commissioner
was going to
Suma.
make a motion. I would like to move staff recommendation parts. There's two parts as written, parts 1 and 2, and I don't think I need to read the whole thing.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All right, Ms. Dow, could you take the vote, please?
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
Chair Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Commissioner Liu,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rekdal,
Yes.
Commissioner Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton,
Yes.
motion carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you everyone for your hard work, and thank you to the members of the public for coming in support tonight. We move on to our next agenda item, which is a legislative item, and continued discussion and recommendation on the proposed amendments to the Palo Alto Municipal Code, Title 18, Chapter 18.52, parking regulations, specific to implications of Assembly Bill AB 2097. Is there a staff presentation?
Yes, there is. Um, Here we go. So we last talked about this on May 29th, and that ordinance is on its path to go to the city council without this section D, because that was pulled with wording trouble, the where feasible. And it was also, there was discussion as framed and discussed in the staff report regarding a number of items that we'll kind of focus on tonight. So we do recommend that the Planning Commission continue a discussion. Some of that, the recording of that meeting was a little spotty, so trying to listen to the advice and recommendations for additional research was a little difficult. I tried to capture that. So, we do plan to present to council with some kind of capturing of what type of research and what additional, resources might be needed for some of that work. So just an overview again, the focus of this piece of the ordinance, it was this AB 2097, the state law that precludes imposition of minimum parking requirements on development projects, except for hotels and event centers, within 1/2 mile of major transit stops. We have 3 of them in town. Well, one's in Mountain View, but the radius extends into Palo Alto. So the Planning Commission was concerned on ways to address the loss of accessible and electric vehicle parking spaces under AB 2097 and the provision of short-term loading spaces. So again, we'll just kind of characterize these as 2 topics. Topic 1 being captured here, should projects utilizing AB 2097 be required to provide a short-term loading space for ride share and deliveries? A couple bullets there. How should this policy account for small sites where providing a space may be difficult? And should more than one space be required for larger buildings? And then consider shuttle loading space idea to enable access from pedestrian zones to car parking areas like is found in Europe in places. Consider loading spaces in parking structures and alleys. And then the topic 2 would be, should the city require projects utilizing AB 2097 to provide ADA and EV charging spaces on site? And would this constrain housing development, was a question raised. Again, the ADA support, that was a big agreement point, was that's needed near retail and services, both in downtown and California Avenue, and to consider electric vehicle spaces that could be clustered, maybe away from the shopping areas and enable folks to walk. So, staff began some amount of research working with the Office of Transportation and capturing in this set of tables. So just an overall note is that the Office of Transportation is actively looking into ADA space needs in the CalAv area. And there are ADA spaces in the garages, I should say, and surface lots. This table captures some walkthroughs done this week to look at the street spaces and alley spaces. So you can see here captured with color, we have different types of loading spaces. The yellow commercial spaces, the white non-commercial spaces, and the green spaces, that's short term for all. One of the features of this is that for ADA placard holders, they're allowed to exceed in most cases, I think, the time limits that are imposed upon the parking, the loading spaces and the parking spots, the short-term spots. So if they have a placard, they cannot be ticketed for, exceeding the 3 minutes or 10 minutes or what have you, is my understanding. So this just kind of gives an overview where they are in this area. We haven't mapped them, but it just gives some addresses so you get an overall sense. So we do have, we have 6 20-minute yellow commercial spots, 1 30-minute spot, 2 3-minute white spots, and 1 10-minute loading spot. So then we have the downtown. this is quite a bit more spaces for loading. In addition to loading, there's taxi cab and valet spaces, or there's 2 of those. You'll see in the yellow, again, reflected the commercial spots. There are 14 of those, 20-minute loading spots. There are 4 white non-commercial loading spots with different time limitations, and 17 short-term green spots with different time limitations. And you'll see the locations there generally described. So again, the placard holders can go and load in the white as well as in the green. If they're commercial, they can go to the yellow, and they can take longer to do their loading and unloading. These tables do exclude the public parking garages and surface lots. These are not included in this table, so there are more loading spaces available. Just to note that there have been studies in the last couple of years or so and beyond. There was a study of University Avenue. There's a project looking at University Avenue streetscape. They did not look at the side streets, so they captured a table here that they provided to me showing University Avenue itself between the different blocks. And then there is a 2017 study that was done of the downtown parking occupancy conditions. So I'm happy to forward that on for those that may not have seen that back in 2017 before we got into the pandemic. Then, of course, my final slides just show the AB 2097 circle areas. So the first one is our high volume Palo Alto station at University Avenue that includes this transit station. So that's quite a wide swath of properties that are not subject to providing parking unless they are hotels and event centers. We have the Cal Ave station radius. And then, of course, there's the San Antonio station, which does not have a large volume of properties that would need loading, but there are some of those religious institution properties along Alma that could, flip to housing at some point. So we want to think about those as well. So that concludes this presentation, and I can bring back to help us focus the conversation to maybe topic 1 and 2, and to the pleasure of the chair, how you would proceed.
Okay, so just to recap, the plan is to, that if we want to make any changes, there's likely more staff time required to investigate more. And so if it is our recommendation that we think certain things should be done and we don't have enough data for that we can make a recommendation that we need certain additional data, or we think certain additional things should be done with respect to loading or ADA or AVS spaces. And then City Council would decide whether or not they're dedicating the additional resources that are needed to generate that data for us. So let's start with clarifying questions. And then, yes, go ahead, Commissioner Heckman.
So the staff recommendation, and I think this ties a little bit to what the chair was just saying, but the staff recommendation is just to discuss this. So previously, we had the whole of this ordinance, and we voted to move most of it forward except for this discrete issue.
Yes.
Which is now in front of us. And I'm wondering if we don't have the ability tonight to move this piece forward to council with a vote, because the recommendation is just to discuss. So can we vote to move it forward in some form?
I mean, I think the recommendation could include requesting that the council, pursue and direct staff, resources and stuff to. Oh, thanks, Albert.
Yeah. So if the commission is ready to recommend a specific change to the ordinance to be included in what goes to the council, you're welcome to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Suma?
Forgive me if this question was asked last time, but I don't remember. How are the circles measured? In other words, where is the epicenter? And is it as the crow flies, or?
Yes.
Yeah, I
It's the
thought it
crow
was.
flies, and it's the epicenter of the two of the stations. For the Palo Alto station, it's not only the station as the point, but it's also the transit center with the buses that, accommodate Samtrans and VTA. So it kind of makes it an oblong circle or an oval in that case.
So I think Ms. French, just to clarify, so it's not that it's measured as a half a mile from a point. It's measured as a half a mile from the edge of of an area. Is that correct?
Well, it's measured from a point in the case of the two stations, but in the case of the Palo Alto station, it's not only the train station, but it's the transit center that includes the bus, the bus turnarounds radius. So that's another transit. So it kind of makes it
Understood.
more oblong. Is that clearer?
Commissioner Summa, do you have more
But
clarification?
I can show the slide.
But there's still one, basically, there aren't two circles like a Venn diagram that connect. There's one circle because you found the center, basically established the center of the whole transit center, including the parking lots and everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the ruler in place, but a number of folks were looking at it and trying to figure out how to measure this at some point a year or so ago when this went into effect. So this does, you can see how this shape, in other words, is a little more oblong or ovally than the shape for the Cal Ave station.
If I may, Chair?
Yes.
It looks like two overlapping circles. You can see right up there, there's a little park at the top. And you can see that the two circles make a little V shape. It's definitely two circles. So there's each transit center has a circle, and these are overlapping almost entirely. So it's hard to see because they don't have an outline, but it's two circles.
So there's a train circle and a bus transit center circle?
Yes, that are merged.
Why are there two? Because I thought we established that bus routes were not.
Yes, I can explain.
Okay.
So bus routes, say at El Camino and Page Mill Road, they are crossing, but they don't have a frequency of 14 seconds headway or some kind of thing like that. And I can't recall exactly, but maybe 14 minutes. Anyhow, this VTA Samtrans station does have the correct frequency of pickups and drop-offs and moving around. So it qualifies as a transit stop, high quality transit stop with the right number of headway buses going back and forth.
Is that because the individual routes have headways that qualify it, or is it because there's Samtrans and VTA buses using it?
All I know is that in other, like, you can't take the El Camino bus system and say that whole thing is a high quality corridor for the purpose of AB 2097, because you need to have a cross street as well that fits that definition. I don't have the definition in front of me that I could share with you. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I understand that. I would be interested in seeing how it was calculated precisely, because that's why I'm asking the question. So
yeah,
that would be useful to know at a later date, just for one's edification.
Does your question also extend to exactly where in the train station, how that epicenter is determined?
Yes,
Okay.
because I assumed it was the absolute center of the property, which makes one point. Oh, sorry.
It appears, I actually say it looks like it's 4 or 5 circles here, and each of those blue dots looks like it's the center of a circle. And I believe what was done is they took the center of the platform. And in the transit center, there must be, multiple platforms that are being used. And if you look at the Cal Ave station as well, you'll see there's 2 dots, and I think it's the center of each platform, northbound and southbound.
The one side of, the northbound trains and the southbound trains, 2 dots.
Okay, thank you. Other clarifying questions? I've got one that's more like a typo. So if you look at packet page 46, I think there's a typo there. Just under the number 1 in the middle of the page, the first line that says for sites with existing development, the number on-site parking, I think they're missing the word of. So it should read the number of on-site parking spaces. Commissioner Liu?
Yeah, one clarifying question for how to take this discussion going forward. Should we start with topic 1 and then go to topic 2? I just want to confirm.
That sounds like an excellent plan. Let's do that.
Thank you.
All right, so are there any public comments? I don't think so.
I have no request to speak.
Okay, so let's move on to commissioner discussion. Commissioner Heckman.
Okay, so with that agreed upon direction, I'm going to collapse it for a moment. Sorry, because I'm seeing a couple of issues, and one of them isn't either topic 1 or topic 2, and that's this issue of feasibility. And so we've got a couple of things going on. First of all, we don't have a clear definition of feasibility yet, at least not in the staff report, and appreciate that a portion of our transcript was garbled, and so staff really didn't have the guidance that we tried to offer. But I think I raised that issue about feasibility, and really, my concern is perpetuation of the Palo Alto process. I don't want a situation where somebody gets stuck for a month debating with staff what is and isn't feasible. But we know as to the ADA spots and the EVA charging spots, those are parking spots. And so it's not even a question of feasibility there, right? They're parking spots, so we can't require them. Well, in a place where you can't require no automobile parking, it seems to me inconsistent. So what I was wondering if a way to solve all of these things, because really what we want is we would like people to provide loading where it can fit. We would like them to provide an ADA spot, and we would like them to provide an EVA charging spot where it can fit. And so what I'm wondering is, and we don't know what feasible means. So one thought I had was to broaden this language that we're looking at, and get rid of feasible and just say that rather than shall provide, are strongly encouraged to provide loading space, EVA charging space, ADA space, and that will alert developments that these are desirable, and will spur, I'm hoping, a design look at it and maybe a conversation with staff. And I think if we approach it that way, I think that's something that could be packaged tonight without more data. The drawback to that suggestion is it's now permissive rather than mandatory, right? We're not mandating that they do it. We're just encouraging them to do it. And that may not satisfy all of my fellow commissioners. But I wanted to lead with that so that at least people could consider it as we work through topics 1 and 2.
Commissioner Aiken and then Commissioner Liu.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines as Commissioner Heckman, although I was going to be more prescriptive. In reviewing the code, there's already a lot of mechanism to use director's adjustment for reduction. And in fact, it's really pretty flexible. You can share spaces between properties. Spaces don't have to be on the property of the applicant. There are even fairly generous constraints on how to define acceptable, accessible places that are off the property. So what I was leaning towards was I really would like to see at least accessible parking be required, and preferably loading zones as well. Perhaps we could require them and make it clear that if none is provided, then the applicant must submit a TDM plan that describes how the remaining spaces would be provided, how the shortfall would be covered, and it would be director's adjustment to decide whether the project could then omit accessible places or loading zone altogether. But the thinking that I had done so far, it would be the burden of the applicant to suggest a mechanism for accomplishing that, and then strictly the director's purview to accept it or renegotiate. So, yeah, we're thinking along the same lines, but the details differ so far.
Commissioner Liu?
Thank you. I'm still digesting Commissioner Aiken's comment. I think that generally makes sense to me. My interest is in ADA parking and not so much EV or loading spaces. But in response to Commissioner Heckman's comment, I wanted to make sure I understood the default state for AB 2097. And my understanding is that if any parking is provided, it would have to kind of align with default standards. So if parking is voluntarily provided and we require one ADA space for units of or buildings of a certain size, for instance, that the applicant wouldn't have a choice, that like the ADA space would have to be prioritized. And so I was trying to like read what I was trying to read both AB 2097 and what other cities did, and that's my understanding, and wanted to pass that out there as informative to Commissioner Heckman's discussion point, but I also want to throw it out there, Mr. Yang, for example, if that is not correct.
Yeah, so we discussed this briefly the last time we were talking about this issue. There's a provision in AB 2097 that says basically, notwithstanding what we've said in this section, cities can require ADA and EV spaces to be provided as if this section didn't apply. And so that provision is a little bit unclear, and there's differing approaches that cities across the state have taken. The majority approach is what you described, Commissioner Liu, and that's what we have, what staff has been doing as well, which is to say, if you provide parking voluntarily, you've got to provide the EV and ADA spaces as you normally would. The minority approach that I'm only aware of, one or two jurisdictions that have done this, but there could be more, is to say you have to provide all of the ADA and EV spaces that you would have provided if the normal parking requirement applied. So if you had, a normal parking requirement of 50 spaces, and you were required to provide 3 ADA spaces and 2 EV chargers, well, you don't have to provide the regular parking spaces, but you still have to provide those 5 spaces. That's not the approach that Palo Alto has taken, and as far as I'm aware, it's not very common, but it is seen in some places.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
All right, Commissioner Suma?
Thank you. So I'm still, so one thing we can do, I think, is exempt existing development that's in downtown areas where there's no setback required, because that would clarify that this is just for new developments. And I don't think we want to start requiring on-site parking in places where there's an existing development that's all built out. I think that's one way to clarify, one thing to add instead of the word feasibility, which we all agreed was problematic. I'm not sure how we could craft that language. I think EVSE spots off-site is not problematic for me at all. And I think eventually we're going to need all EVSE spots, we hope. So it's kind of like the more we get ready for EVSE in parking spots, the better. But ADA spots certainly come first to me as a priority for people, as we make a lot of these changes, including the closure of Cal Ave, people with who are differently abled are going to find themselves having to get further from their vehicles. And in all cases, I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of disabilities. So, but sometimes that's very, very hard. So I still think we should find a way to get as much close to the locations as we can. Loading spots, I'm more interested in accommodating human being loading, like drop off, and but then traditionally our loading spot requirements were based on deliveries. So there's both a lot more deliveries to small businesses than there used to be. And there's also this other thing, which is people who are going to live car-free in large numbers, having a space to drop them off that's convenient to their home, which also could have some overlap with persons with disabilities. So that's kind of how I prioritize them. I understand the city has taken a certain direction in their interpretation of AB 2097, but I do believe that AB 2097 has a lot of sort of, oh, if you don't want to do this, this is how you don't have to do it, that we haven't utilized, both in what our attorney just mentioned and also a more general principle that if it isn't good, if this doesn't work and you can make a good argument for some development or in an area even, I guess, you can do it. And I'm a little bit mystified by the circles, I have to admit, because a half mile from anything as a crow flies, in my understanding, can only be from one point. And I don't think there's an advantage for residents and future residents in expanding the circles, so to speak. So those are I'm not sure how to achieve all of this, but those are my concerns. And I appreciate that we didn't have a good record of the meeting, and that staff looked at our requests and concerns and kind of decided it was too much work to fully evaluate it without council direction at this time. That makes perfect sense to me. But especially with the ADA, I would also like to know I think there needs to be a study of existing ADA spots and how they're being utilized. I mean, maybe there's enough of them near our downtowns and in the other circle area, the San Antonio area, to accommodate it. And maybe we really do need all the extra ones that would have been added if things had been developed under our default standards. So that's kind of where I am right now. Thanks.
Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you so much. I'm intrigued by my colleague's comments, and I wanted to see if Mr. Yang can clarify where those circles are specified to be from in the law.
You know, I don't recall, and I'm not sure that I'll be able to find it tonight. But this was, I have a sense that, because as Ms. French said, this is something that staff discussed extensively about a year ago or more. I have a sense that there was direction from the state on how to.
Yeah. If we're looking at the drawings, you know, you specify the centers of these, and those are all transit centers. And so I'm not sure it will be that hard to find, but it's an intriguing question. And I seem to recall that it was from transit centers. So if we can find out one way or the other and satisfy Commissioner Suma's question and get us all on the same page. But assuming it's that, that would necessitate having more than one center, right?
Well, I guess to clarify, the question that staff had when we were first looking at this was, are these radii supposed to be taken from the edge of the parcel or from the edge of the platform?
Right. So that's not what Commissioner Suma was asking.
Right.
She was saying, why is there more than one? I thought we could just answer that pretty quickly because it's based on a transit center. Or is that not your understanding?
No, I guess I was just saying that, Commissioner Suma suggested that the radius should only be taken from one point, but in staff's mind, the alternative was to take it from the edge of a polygon. So
Right.
it would not be 1 point.
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat back what I heard, and maybe we can continue questioning if that's needed. But it is important for us all to be on the same page, especially if that's a concern for one of our commissioners. So my understanding based on the drawing is that there's no need to consolidate centers. Each center has its own right to its own radius, except in this case, they're just overlapping. And if they were a mile apart, they'd still have the right to their own radius. So I don't know, that's my interpretation, and I would love to hear any other interpretations. Thank you.
Commissioner Rectal?
Yeah, there are a lot of housing bills, but I know one of them was the edge of the platforms. So you'd have the whole, any bus stop, any part where you could load, that was the criteria. Another one was just the property. So if you in like the parking lot, the final corner of the polygon of the property, that was where it measured from. But I can't speak to 2097. I do like the idea of the Commissioner Aiken's suggestion for the director approval. Staff, can you discuss how onerous is a director's approval?
Well, typically, a director's adjustment for parking and loading would go hand in hand with an architectural review application for a new project. So that it would be bundled together. If there were a site and design project, which we don't see a lot of those anymore, but usually in the foothills with homes. But in any case, that could be bundled and brought to the Planning and Transportation Commission. But generally, it's kind of a staff level, director level process that can be, appealed along with the architectural review approval for a project. If and most projects would go through that route, architectural review. So I think.
So in general, there's not an extra hoop jumping. It's just that they present their plan and say, this is why we think we don't need a loading spot. And then staff can discuss and say yes.
Yes, and it would ride along with that action.
Okay.
Well, so I guess the one thing I would add to that response is, for housing projects, it could be a significant additional issue. So it would, we are anticipating that most housing projects are going to go through a streamlined review where they have at most one courtesy meeting with the ARB. And that review is typically just, comparing it to objective standards. So adding in a discretionary request would be potentially, adding time to that process. But on the other hand, if you have a project that is providing on-site affordability, they could potentially waive this requirement under density bonus law.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to chime in with my comments before we move on to the second round. So I also feel strongly that the ADA parking should be in close proximity. And also because we are the Planning Commission, I don't want to do anything too short-sighted with respect to electric vehicles because I know that the state has laws, I think in 2030, where everything's going to be electric. That doesn't change between now and 2030. But I know we're going that way. And so I am worried about not provide, for our core commercial areas and areas where we've also said with the housing improvement, with the HIP incentives, that there could be a lot more height and a lot more density, that we're not planning for the ADA and EVSE, as well as loading spaces. I know that it's been in the news quite a lot, that with Uber and meal delivery services, that not having adequate loading zones is becoming a real problem and causing safety issues as well as traffic issues. And so I want to make sure that we try and plan for that. I like Commissioner Aiken's idea. I'm not sure how, if that, so I'm not sure about the magnitude of the problem for all three categories of spaces. And then I worry about how onerous it may or may not be. So those are just my thoughts. For something like EVSE, I like the idea of us as a city planning for it. And it's something that makes sense to me as something that could work well with, say, an in lieu fee, but that could also become very onerous. So those are my thoughts. It certainly makes sense to group EVSE spaces together. And, you know, if we were, say, to do those installations in city parking structures, they would cost money. And so it would make sense for a new development to contribute a small amount. It doesn't sound like it would be a lot of money necessarily towards that infrastructure. So those are my thoughts for now. So we'll move on to a second round of comments. Commissioner Liu?
Thank you. A few comments, also one kind of question to scope out for feasibility. I'll start with the question. So I'd appreciate any context on how the city currently permits or charges for curb cuts and driveways. And my reference point is virtually all projects will have sidewalk frontage, and potentially a viable solution is to, for properties that dedicate no parking, carve out a chunk of the sidewalk for disabled or loading, or a disabled spot or a loading spot. And that would not take up more space or kind of give that building necessarily special privileges, since I live in a 40 building unit and we have a double width driveway as well, just going into the building. So yeah, I want to understand that practice around curb cuts and driveways and whether that could be a viable solution for disabled access.
So I don't know if Nate is on, and he would like to weigh in on this topic. I know when, downtown, for instance, we're not doing curb cuts in the University Avenue area. That's just smaller lots. We don't want to have curb cuts. But the outer areas, of course, curb cuts are an option. The farther out from the center. Nate, were you tuning in on this?
Unfortunately, I don't really have a perspective on this piece, unfortunately. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if we can't reach a resolution tonight, I think that would be a topic I'd be interested in following up on. Just understanding the city can facilitate a process that puts those loading spaces and accessible spaces on the sidewalk. Okay, a couple of comments. I understand Mr. Yang's comment and Commissioner Suma's comment about there is another option to require accessible and full full accessible and electric parking. I don't think my preference is not to take that option. I think option one, as described by Mr. Yang, is more in the spirit of the law. And we genuinely do want to encourage people to have more of a car-free lifestyle. Similarly, I think electric vehicles are a much lower priority. I think if a developer wants to build a project with very little or no parking, I think that's a really exciting opportunity and an exciting experiment. And they will have bike parking. They will potentially have other mitigations. And having no vehicle is vastly superior for the environment and for traffic than having an electric vehicle. Actually, I'll wrap my comments there and think more about director's approval and come back.
Commissioner Heckman?
So in the first round, I sort of lumped everything together. Now I want to break it apart. Looking at what we have in the staff report, on packet page 45, subpart A of the ordinance deals with parking. It mentions loading, but really defers it to section D, which we'll talk about in a minute. But what it says is if you're 863.2 location, no automobile parking is required. And so I was wondering what Mr. Yang described as the Palo Alto practice, which is in line with the majority, that none's required, but if you provide, then we are, as Commissioner Liu said, prioritizing ADA and EV. Is that in some other section that just isn't in the staff report?
So I guess I would say when you provide parking voluntarily, Palo Alto doesn't prioritize ADA and EV. We just require, the standard ratio of ADA and EV spaces. And those requirements are, I'm not sure if they're in a different part of 1852, but I do know that they are also in the building code.
Okay, so I think what that means is with the language that staff has drafted and recommended for part A, no automobile parking is required, but if somebody comes in with a plan that does have some parking, they are directed to these other existing sections of the code that say you have to meet the ADA and EV requirements, even if that takes all the parking you want to provide.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And is that when they're told that, is that a requirement that they can have waived through density bonus law?
No, that's not something that can be waived.
Okay, so it seems like we've got pretty good protection on those issues now, unless we want to go to the minority view of the couple of cities that have made it more stringent. And so I guess I'm liking that approach because I feel like we are covered there. So now let me go to the other topic, and that is the loading spaces. Again, trying to figure out, and which is the sole subject of part B of this section. And what I'm wondering is, first of all, if we started that last sentence with something like subject to adjustment by the director in the event of demonstrable infeasibility, right? Now I think we put a little more pressure on an applicant to show it can't be done. And if it can't be done, then they can get out of it by going to by having the director so determined. But I wanted to ask Mr. Yang on this one, is is that, if we had that preface to this, would that be something that could be waived using density bonus law?
Yes,
Okay.
I think that is something that could be waived.
Okay. So you almost don't, because it's something that could be, because it could be waived, you almost don't need that prefatory clause, because either you do it, or if you're in density bonus law and you either don't want to or can't, you just make that one of your concessions, thing you waive. So then all we'd have to deal with is not every project is a density bonus law project, right?
Right. So it wouldn't apply to any commercial projects. And I think Commissioner Suma's suggestion is well taken, that we, carve out projects that aren't changing the existing footprint. So, AB 2097 is very broad. It could apply to tenant improvements. So we want to make sure we're not capturing those. And in addition, I would say that the city is going to be rolling out a improved and expanded HIP housing incentive program, probably this fall, hopefully. And projects that take advantage of the housing incentive program they can't take advantage of the housing incentive program if they're using density bonus. So there might be actually a fair number of housing projects that also decide not to use density bonus.
Okay. All right. So then I think for this subpart D, I think we have to have some mechanism for requirement and relief. And really, if we can't define feasibility, but can provide a mechanism for a decision on it, that's kind of second best. And so, maybe that's how we could handle D, along with folding in this concept that Mr. Yang just mentioned that Commissioner Suma had first described. So, okay, I'll leave it there.
Commissioner Aiken, then Rectal.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm not sure I followed all of your line of thought there. For me, the reason the director's adjustment was attractive is that it's applicable even when density bonus law is not involved. And there is a surprising amount of mechanism already in place in the code for doing things that you would like to do. You don't have to prove as an applicant that it's infeasible to provide accessible parking places. You simply have to make a convincing case that those can be handled some other way that's acceptable to the director. So it eliminates the feasibility issue, as well as building in flexibility that you might want to use for shared parking in particular. So I found it attractive because a lot of the mechanism that we're struggling to provide is actually there already, because we're only interested in reducing a requirement, which is what the director's adjustment is intended to provide.
So if I could just clarify, the discussion about feasibility is solely limited to loading spaces. It's only showing up in D. So when we're talking about ADA or shared parking, that's not where this feasibility concept, at least, is written in the code.
Yeah, although it doesn't need to be limited to that. Right.
Right. And so I'm only trying to figure out how, when we're talking about loading zones, loading spaces, can we have a little bit better guidance than where feasible? That's why I tried to split it and first talk about ADA and EV spaces.
Commissioner Rectal.
Yeah, with loading spaces, what I'm concerned about is if we don't provide them, they'll just double park or park in the bike lanes. And at my work, they do that all the time. And if you're biking down there, you have to go around into the traffic just because there's no drop-off zone. But anyway, for ADA, 2097 gets rid of parking requirements just because you're close to transit, and you'll be able to go to transit and you'll be able to walk your half mile to your location. someone who's disabled is not going to walk a half mile. So they have a much higher bar. And so for them, they are much more likely to drive, even if it's a very convenient public transit option. So I think we have to provide some. So I'd be more on the minority approach. The question is, do you want a full allocation, or do you think that there still will be some reduction and we can reduce the amount that you normally would have to have in a development? And I'd be open to that, is having some required, but not necessarily the full complement of ADA parking.
Commissioner Tumbleton.
Thank you. I just want to echo something Vice Chair Rectal just said. You have to be able to do certain things, and ability is not something everybody has, right? So we have to accommodate them, and that's what the ADA laws are about. So I think as long as we feel that we have sufficient direction from the code that those things are covered, then this discussion is extraneous. But if we think that this somehow will eliminate ADA parking, then I think that's where we need to be protected. So I think what I'm asking my fellow commissioners or Mr. Yang to weigh in on is what risk do we actually have? I know we're spending a lot of time on this. We want to make sure people are protected, and that's our goal, I think, of everybody up here. But what we don't understand is where we're at risk, because it seems that somehow our existing laws already require this, and we're trying to ascertain in a bunch of different directions. We're looking at it from every angle. We're trying to ascertain what risk does this state law provide to us, and we're just really not clear on that. So if anybody wants to weigh in a little bit on why we think this would override some of our other protections, I think that'd be really helpful for this discussion. Thank you.
So my understanding is that with at least the adoption of or with the certification of the new housing element, that there will be much increased density in these circles. And since we thought that there was the need in the past for a certain ratio of ADA spots, now that, there'll be more development in here, and those aren't required to create any ADA spots, then there presumably might become a shortage. But I think that's one of the big questions, is that we don't know what the demand is going to be.
Are you saying this would override the federal level mandates for?
I asked the same question, so I'd love it.
I agree. I think we just don't have the answer to that yet.
I'd love it if Mr. Yang could chime in on that. Just because I asked that same question at pre-meeting.
Right. So I don't believe that AB 2097 exposes the city to any, additional risk under the ADA. All of the, the examples of sort of city services or, some of the cases involving, people claiming that sidewalks are inaccessible, they don't have the right curb cuts. Those all deal with accessibility of a service when you're providing it, or accessibility of a resource when it's being provided. And in this case, for parking, the parking is not being provided. And when it is provided, the city is requiring the accessibility, be provided in that same portion.
How is housing not a service that's being provided by a housing system or housing unit?
Well,
if they can't access that, then I don't understand. Thank you. Go ahead.
So that's, again, I think there's a basic difference between city programs and city infrastructure and a zoning code and its requirements for private development.
So
And
can I just chime in here? If I understand correctly, AB 20, Mr. Yang doesn't believe that AB 2097 creates a liability for the city in terms of the city not meeting federal ADA law. However, it may create a practical problem where people who need ADA parking don't have it. So we wouldn't be legally at risk from, if I understand correctly. But then I think what we all up here are concerned about is that we may not have enough spots to meet demand.
And it's just a matter of precedent. At some point, somebody's going to want to access their house and won't be able to.
That's right. So that's one of, that's why I think we should lean toward, with respect to the ADA parking, we should lump it in with a currently proposed treatment for a loading zone where we require and then allow directors discretion. And another idea I had, and I don't know, I could ask Mr. Baird, do we have any city rules right now for on-street ADA parking? Like if, are there a certain number of on-street spots that are required to be ADA? Because that's another way to solve it, right? If we're moving toward a car-free world in these circles, we could take street parking in these circles and allot a percentage to ADA.
Generally, with our on-street curb programs, we just make sure that the users, the users who would be affected are in agreement about what needs to happen. So if we have a loading zone, we will assess whether the folks around that loading zone all agree to that loading zone and the time needed. And so, you know, if the folks around an on-street curb space wanted an ADA spot there, you know, we could agree to put that in, I believe, you know, but I'm not aware of any specific requirements generally. I know that in the Cal Ave area, we had some blue ADA spaces where we've removed some parking. So we are actively looking at, you know, relocating those spaces that were previously there that have now been removed, you know, putting them somewhere nearby. But I'm not aware of like what conditions led to the original imposition of those. In general, we have a process for, you know, people requesting ADA spaces, on-street ADA spaces. You know, it's kind of engineers kind of evaluate the need and what's happening. But it's, you know, everything's kind of very context specific and addressing very specific problems that have arisen for stakeholders in a very specific area, but not a general requirement. Because it's just really hard to predict what the specific needs are. And, you know, when the uses change, often sometimes the curb changes, those changes change as well, or the needs change. So, you know, generally in long term, the Office of Transportation is looking at ways to provide more flexible curb changes and, you know, use changes. But, you know, there's lots of ways that can be done with technology moving forward. We're just not currently equipped with the policy or the, you know, technological pieces to do that flexibility that we need, but we are looking into it right now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Aiken?
Yeah, apropos this discussion, I was looking at the code earlier today. 18.54.030G governs accessible parking that isn't associated with a particular building. So that includes some of the on-street parking. And there are requirements there. They're not onerous, but there are some spelled out there, particularly proximity to entrances and proximity to shortest paths, if I remember correctly. So they're pretty reasonable. Following up on comments from Commissioner Templeton and Commissioner Heckman, I wonder how much of this is, how much of the discussion is based in uncertainty about how likely it will be that zero park developments will be built. if you look at the requirements that exist in the code, if a developer decides to put parking into a project, then to me, they seem pretty reasonable for provision of accessible spaces. So I don't worry about that case. It's the case where there is zero. And per Commissioner Liu's comments, I think that case is going to be more common within the next, say, 5 to 10 years. So I don't have any way to evaluate how common it will be, because this has to do with, is a project marketable to its potential tenants? And I'm no expert in that. But that's the case that concerns me. For where we already have a willingness to provide parking, I'm not too worried. But where we're building zero parked places, that's where I think we need some assurance that people will have access. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Templeton?
I really like how you put that, Commissioner Aiken, because I'm thinking now about testing scenario and building software, right? You test all the cases you can anticipate, but when we built this code, we didn't anticipate zero parking as a edge case, and now we do. And so, you know, you're saying there's a scenario we haven't anticipated with our code the way it is, and we need to backfill that potential bug. So that's an interesting perspective, and I do think this was never anticipated. So maybe we do have to think about minimum requirements for ADA, like how to counteract the scenario we didn't anticipate. So I wonder, are the changes we're making tonight only for the AB to whatever it is, or is it for anything that has no parking? Like, is there any other, can we fix this bug with just this stuff tonight, or do we have to make something more broad?
I think we're just trying to fix the bug that's created by AB 2097.
And that's the only way we can have no parking, as we understand it, because I think there's at least
theoretically,
another.
Based on what Mr. Yang said, there could be parking. Well, no, he said it was protected. He said ADA was protected for builder's remedies. So.
Okay, well, if it's just this one, I understand better, and I'm really appreciative that we had a chance to have this discussion in more depth. Thanks.
And on Commissioner Templeton's point, I just want to quickly ask or confirm, all of this discussion is in the context of AB 2097 housing projects with 50 or more units. I see some nods, but I also see some
I don't think so, because AB 2097 actually says that anything in the circle, any development in the circle isn't required to be parked. Is that correct, Mr. Yang?
Oh.
That's right.
Yes, yes. But to Commissioner Templeton's point, at least section D, so that first discussion topic, the code begins with residential mixed-use structures with 50 or more dwelling units. So for a restaurant that doesn't want to offer any parking, that's not really explicitly in scope of our discussion on Part D. So we aren't by default making any wider sweeping rules right now, I believe.
Ms. French, that wasn't my understanding. I thought that we were discussing, we specifically pulled D.
Yes.
But the issue that was raised was the whole of 1852.040, correct?
Well, I believe looking through the minutes that item D is the one that was pulled out of the ordinance. The rest moved forward, but there was interest in having more information to have a robust discussion about what are the solves for, how can we think about our areas that are in the AB 2097? So, yeah.
That makes sense, but I just wanted to point that out. So if we want to we should be explicit about all the uses that we want to extend to.
So do I understand correctly, we're just discussing the D at the top of page 40, packet page 46? And is the question still whether we include where feasible?
That's a good question, Commissioner Templeton.
We
Not a
could spend
very
all
structured
day working on
discussion
it.
that we've been having.
Yeah.
So if I recall our discussion last time, the AB, implementing AB 2087 came to us. There were broader comments also brought up about, so for example, for ADA, at least when I was thinking about ADA in that discussion, it wasn't just with respect to housing development. It was about everything in that circle. But for loading specifically, I think we were specifically concerned with those units. But then kind of in the discussion of ADA and EVSC, because that's a carve out in the state law, I think we were all interested in having a little bit of a broader discussion.
Understandable. So I guess what I'm asking, Chair, is how do you want to wrap this up?
Well, why don't we start with the most specific thing, which is with respect to D. I think we had some pretty specific ideas about how to remedy that. So maybe if we could start with, well, I'm seeing a few more lights now. So let's go to those, but I was going to suggest that we could start with a motion there. And then I think maybe what's required is a recommendation to council that we would like to study some other areas more. Okay, so Commissioner Rectal, then Heckman.
Okay. With regard to the ADA, there are two scenarios that really bother me. One is someone who needs handicap parking and they can't find a spot, and now they have to park 3 blocks away or whatever. That's very onerous, and that's not very good. The other is a whole bank of handicap parking that no one uses. That's also because that's very expensive, and you could use something else instead. To avoid that second, one possibility would be to combine the two in the sense that if you made half those spots handicapped only and half of them be 3-minute parking, that 3-minute parking could be used by handicapped also. And that also would allow DoorDash people and people picking up Ubers to use those. And as long as it's short enough, if all the designated handicapped are full, handicapped person can wait for 3 minutes and then they can take that spot. So it would have a minimal effect on the worst case of not being able to find a spot, but also make those spots more usable. So I think that has a possibility.
Commissioner Hackman.
All right, so it seems like the last time we considered this, we did move subpart A forward to the council. And subpart A is what says in the circle, no automobile parking shall be required. So that's already, but really that's taken up a lot of our conversation tonight, because the ramification of that is we sort of default into language in other parts of the code about ADA parking and EV parking that is of concern to us. So I think we have a couple of options regarding those parking issues. One is essentially take a wait and see attitude, right? We've already forwarded this to council. It will roll out. If I don't know if council is holding, I can't remember for the staff report, holding for us, or they've already moved forward with it, but it will basically, if they don't change it, it's going to roll out in what's described as the majority practice of cities, right? Where if you provide no parking, then there's no ADA parking, there's no EV parking. But if you do, then we're going to require it, right? And so we can let that just roll out in what I call a wait and see as we move forward, if this becomes an issue, if we get a development or two developments which are not proposing any parking, and there are ADA ramifications that are of concern, it seems like every other meeting we're amending some ordinance or another. And so, this could be revisited in the future. The alternative is is to start to, I guess, inform the council that this is a concern of the commission's, and we really think it would be wise to move to this position that a few cities, or at least a couple, have taken, that we want those spots. Or as the vice chair said, at least some part of those spots that are required, and communicate that to them. That's sort of the alternatives I see for subpart A, which again, we've already moved forward. On subpart D, I think if I'm understanding Commissioner Aiken, I think what you're saying is we could just get rid of where feasible, because without that language, there is still flexibility in our code to handle the situation where, for whatever reason, there literally is no place a loading zone could go. And I'm comfortable with that approach. If that was the concept, if I understood it correctly, I'm actually comfortable with that approach, because then we're not going to have a fight. We may have a fight, but we're not going to have a disagreement over whether it's feasible or not. You're going to implicitly have to show there's no way to do it, no reasonable way to do it. So I'd be okay with sort of solving that problem that way. So basically, you're just getting a requirement to provide a loading spot, and if there's some reason you can't, you're going to go to the director and get an adjustment, or use one of our other modifying mechanisms in the code. So I would support that.
And maybe just to knock one thing off of our plates, do we have a motion for that piece?
I'm happy to make a motion if there's no more discussion on D we're talking about.
On D?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to, D, which is specifically loading for developments with 50 or, yeah.
Right. All right. So I will move that the PTC recommend to the council adoption of Section 18.52.040 subpart D with the elimination of the words where feasible. Sorry, did I say, or what did I say?
It should be 040. You said 440.
Oh, sorry, 040. 1852-040 subpart D. The modification provided in our packet with the elimination of the words where feasible, so that the sentence begins with the words projects, with the word projects.
Second.
Do we have any discussion on that motion, or would anybody like to speak to their motion?
And just to recap, there's no explicit language needed about director approval.
Based on what Commissioner Aiken said of his reading of the code, yes, there's no.
Okay,
nothing.
Just want to confirm. Yep.
Oh, Mr. Yang, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say it's not needed. It might be, helpful, but staff can think about that, and I think it's within this. We understand the spirit of the PTC's motion.
Okay, great then. Ms. Dow, would you like to? Or Ms. Dow, could you please take the vote?
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Templeton?
Yes.
Commissioner Suma?
Yes.
Vice Chair Rectal?
Yes.
Commissioner Liu?
Yes.
Commissioner Heckman?
Yes.
Chair Chang?
Yes.
Commissioner Aiken?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Okay. Now I think we need to address the stickier issue of our large concern about ADA spots and secondarily potentially EVSE spots. I think Commissioner Heckman did a really good job summarizing kind of what we can do here. I don't remember saying that I was okay not providing ADA spots, but I guess we did approve that last time. So I would love a way to flag that for council. Seems like a pretty large issue. Commissioner Templeton, did you want to say something?
I also don't remember it that way. I thought we had a lot of discussion about it and put it off, but it sounds like maybe we were not as careful in our motion or something.
Yeah, maybe we didn't carve out
Yeah.
adequately.
Perhaps, Ms. French, if you could bring up the presentation slide that had
Sure.
the two subjects for discussion on it.
Just let her pull it up. Commissioner Suma's light is on, so maybe you can, do you want to start speaking?
Not if Commissioner Aiken was going to ask a question, make a point about the slide he just has to bring up.
Yeah, I see the question I asked last time, which was, would the state consider this a constraint? And I gather that's not of concern at the moment. That's probably a question for Councilor Yang.
Oh, I see it. It is in there under topic 2, but it just didn't get its own bullet point. At the end, it's would this constrain housing development? So we don't know what the state would say, and I think it would depend on how it plays out. So if we're getting applications on larger sites that are able to provide this, then that would be all right. If it turns out that developers are saying, well, if I have to build on top of parking now where I was otherwise wouldn't have any parking on the site, I'm going to either not be able to do this project or I'm going to lose units, then I imagine that the state would have an issue.
Okay. It occurs to me that we haven't touched on another relevant subject, which is unbundled parking. So we may well find that developments choose to unbundle and then parking is no longer physically close. But I don't see any way to handle that tonight. Yeah, so we did capture that we were interested in talking about this and maybe making a recommendation to council about it. So per Commissioner Heckman's language earlier, our task now seems to be simply to make a recommendation. Is that your understanding as well? Commissioner Heckman?
Oh, yeah, I think if we're really talking about something that would ultimately modify subpart A, which we already forwarded, then I think, in subject to Mr. Yang's guidance, we're making a recommendation to really revisit that recommendation we made for their consideration to mandate some level of ADA and possibly EV parking.
Commissioner Suma?
I had my light on before. Since ADA and EV spaces was captured in this slide by staff, and we know there were some problems capturing our conversation that evening, there's gaps in that tape. I think, I'm not sure we didn't always mean to have this a carve out for us to discuss in the future, first of all. And I don't know how we're going to I don't know what exactly we should do other than I don't see how we can make a very specific recommendation to council on a specific way to solve this, based on the fact that staff didn't feel they could go further with this without getting council approval for that course of action, because it was going to be too much work. So I think what we have to do is present some options and say that it is, and emphasize that while it may not be required under AB 2097, we feel there is a morally compelling argument that we should use what is legal in the law to best serve a project with accessible parking. So I think it has to be a general principle, and I think various approaches could be conveyed.
Agreed. Do we have, I don't know that I've heard consensus for what all those principles might be. And do we need more information to be able to, so one idea I heard was we could just simply require the ADA parking that would otherwise be required. Another idea, kind of modification on that, was to require some portion of the ADA parking that would be required.
Well, and Commissioner Rectal had a specific recommendation that combined what would have been the required ADA parking perhaps under baseline and federal law with limited time parking. Not sure 3 minutes would do it, but whatever. To accommodate people not possessing placards to use those, with the understanding that maybe we don't need as many assigned ADA spaces as, and we just don't know that. I don't see how to.
So it sounds like what we would need is to move a recommendation onto council that we look more closely at the need for ADA parking, as well as a way to remedy the situation if there are a lot of developments that provide zero parking, correct?
Yes, and we sort of dropped EVSE, I guess, from our conversation. But I mean, as I said, I think that could be offered off-site without any problem. But then it's a matter of whether there should be some financial contribution to upgrade parking stalls to accommodate electric charging.
Oh, I would agree with that. Is there Commissioner Liu?
Okay. So just trying to synthesize some of what I'm hearing with a focus on the ADA spaces. I think I personally disagree on the EVSC spaces. We want to communicate to council that we should prioritize ADA access. We should ask council to work with or to direct staff to create a policy on street sidewalk parking that is both ADA accessible and supports loading spaces in a way that's responsive to developments, so that we can actually prioritize an ADA space in front of a development if it comes before us. And I think we also want to have some clarity around what the other requirements would be. I think I agree with Commissioner Suma. This is something that staff would need to take a pass at, like for different uses and different numbers of units and different square footage, what the right number of ADA spaces to ask, either on the development site or on the sidewalk should be. So those are maybe the three things that I think we have some consensus on, potentially. Just communicating the overall priority of ADA spaces, making sure that our city policies around sidewalk and curbside ADA and loading spaces would be responsive to development, and taking a pass at more detailed requirements.
Commissioner Rectal.
I'll try a motion and see. people want to amend. PTC recommends that council direct staff to investigate the need for ADA and EV parking in areas subject to AB 2097 and then return subject to PTC for further deliberation. Maybe for recommendation.
Do we have a second?
I will second it for the purposes of discussion.
Okay, great. Commissioner Heckman, I see a light, but I don't know if that was from before the motion.
Well, it was from just before because I had a motion kind of along the similar lines, but it picked up a couple more concepts. One of yours and one that Commissioner Liu just mentioned. So let me just read it,
and
right? And then
I'm happy to flip mine out if you like yours better.
Right, it's just a little more detailed. So my motion would be that the PTC recommend to the City Council that it consider some modification of Section 18.52.040A to mandate at least a minimal number of ADA parking spaces for projects within a half mile of public transit, consistent with the language of Government Code Section 65863.2 and the position taken by some cities responding to AB 2097. That was the first point. And then the second point was, and to direct staff to develop, and I don't know if this should be develop or refine, policy to provide ADA parking spaces on streets and other public property in these areas, these half mile within transit areas. So that was the concept of the motion I was thinking of making.
How to best handle this. So Commissioner Rekdal, does that we don't have substitute motions, but
Right.
you could withdraw, but I just
Or
wanted to
amend your motion to say that.
amend your motion to say
Part of
that,
it.
right?
Right.
But I think that there was a piece of your motion that was missing potentially, which was about EVSE spaces.
Yeah.
Okay.
So was your omission of EVSE spaces intentional?
It was because I really, the sense I'm getting from the commission is that our big concern right now is accessibility. And maybe EV will take care of itself down the road. It's a little, the need is not as pressing and the solutions are possibly different because there could be economies of scale to cluster them in certain places where, of course, that's not going to be true for accessible parking. So I did intend to leave it out, but I'm open to.
Well, maybe what we could do is address the two types of spaces separately, right? So we could do a separate motion
Sure.
On a separate recommendation regarding EVSE.
Sure.
I'm skeptical about requiring EVSE, but I haven't closed the door, and that's why I wanted them to investigate and see if they have other reasons to encourage us. Right now, I don't see that the commission wanting to mandate EVSE parking, but maybe we haven't thought about it enough, or maybe staff hasn't thought about it enough. So that's why I included it in the motion. So
it could be a third prong. Just softer than, in that first prong, we're really promoting this idea of you should find a minimum number of ADA spaces. A third prong could be softer, right? Investigate the desirability of mandating some level of EVA parking.
In the form of an in-lieu parking or otherwise too, right? So that.
What's a straw poll of, do people want to investigate EVSE or not?
As the seconder of the motion, I will say that I think it should still be investigated, but I feel much more strongly about ADA issues.
I've got a question from Commissioner Templeton.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer the Vice Chair's question as well. Forgive me, I'm not clear. Are these EVSE parking spaces we're talking about on the street, on the curb?
No.
Or they could be underneath?
On private property.
So do we not have laws about that already, or are we worried that they'd be vacated by this bill?
It's the same issue of we have laws if you decide to provide parking in these circles. If you decide, right now, if we implement as written, if you decide not to provide parking, you won't be providing any EVSE parking.
I see. So I'm in alignment with Commissioner Suma on this. I think if a building decides to go no parking, I don't care if they don't have EV parking spaces. I really wish they wouldn't do that because everybody who has an EV might want to charge theirs. I have seen in other jurisdictions a lot of EV street parking, which would be kind of interesting and might make this conversation less tense, because we do want to see people use their EVs and have somewhere to charge them. But I don't think that discussion is on the table tonight. So thank you.
So to the maker and the seconder. So maker.
I see Commissioner Heckman writing furiously here.
Yes, what I was doing was I was just, if the commission is interested in adding a third recommendation regarding EV, somewhat softer, I've written that down so I could recite it for everybody's consideration.
Recite away, please.
Okay. So as a.
No,
Right.
so, but he's considering an amendment.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the third prong of the amended motion, if you will, would be that the council investigate the desirability of requiring at least a minimum number of EV parking spaces for projects within a half mile of public transit. And then we could include that same language I had on the first prong, consistent with the language of the government code, which authorizes that, and the position taken by some cities regarding AB 2097. So it would be really very much the same as the ADA spaces, but rather than mandate at least a minimum is investigate the desirability of it.
Did you want to add anything about in lieu fees?
I think that the only idea about in lieu fees is I think all of us are saying that even if we find that there is a need for EVSE parking, that we all feel pretty strongly that it doesn't need to be right on site in the same way that ADA does, and that there could be other more flexible solutions that would allow us to solve the problem without creating difficulties for the property owners and developers.
Which I think is consistent with investigate.
Yes.
So, okay. I'm willing to, we'll have to talk to the seconder. As the maker, I am willing to take that as an amendment. It's not a replacement motion, but it's an amendment that is the same as your suggestions. Is the seconder open to that?
I think so. I think it captures our concerns and it doesn't try to solve a problem I don't think we're equipped to solve this evening.
Okay, great.
Did Veronica catch that all? Or do you want Bart to read through that again?
Yeah, Commissioner Liu's got a comment.
A quick comment. I'm open to language on investigating EVSE, though I agree that's generally much lower priority than EDA. I feel like I probably have enough information not to support EVSE, but I'm still open to investigating it. A clarifying question on the motion. On the discussion of what other cities are doing, can you repeat the language around that a little bit? I just want to make sure the intention or the reference is clear.
Sure. So the language was consistent with the language of government code section such and such, and the position taken by some cities regarding AB 2097.
Okay, so we're investigating the position that other cities have taken, but we aren't even saying that whether that was option 1 or option 2 in Mr. Yang's or previous mention.
Yeah, we're not describing whether it was the cities in the majority, which of course here it wasn't.
Yes.
But I didn't think we need to describe it as the minority position.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Okay. So any further discussion on So we're moving, the motion that is on the table now is the heavily amended motion. Is there any further discussion on that before we take a vote?
I just want to make sure that staff has the motion.
Do you want me to go through it again, or are you comfortable in our transcription services?
No,
Yeah.
because they're a problem, but sometimes the sound, something happens.
Yeah.
I don't know. So what I have is a motion by Vice Chair Rectal that the Planning and Transportation Commission recommend that council direct staff to investigate the need for, and I have ADA spaces, and return to the PTC for recommendation. And the EVSE part is pulled out, and to investigate the desirability of EVSE if there's a need for more flexible. Oh, no, that was just a parenthetical. And then with all that stuff about the government code and.
Let me reread it.
Yeah.
Let me reread it
Okay.
because I don't think that captured it
Okay.
fully. So all right. So the vice chair's motion
Can you drink a glass of water while you're doing it?
that the PTC recommend to the city council that it consider some modification of section 18.52.040 subpart A to mandate at least a minimal number of ADA parking spaces for projects within 1/2 mile of public transit, consistent with the language of Government Code Section 65863.2 and the position taken by some cities responding to AB 2097. Second, that the council, recommendation is that the council direct staff to develop a policy to provide ADA spaces, parking spaces on streets and other public properties in these areas within 1/2 mile of public transit. And third, the PTC recommends that the council investigate the desirability of requiring at least a minimal number of EVSE parking spaces for projects within 1/2 mile of public transit, consistent with the language of Government Code Section 65863.2 and the position taken by some cities regarding AB, or responding to AB 2097. Hopefully we captured that
Yep.
on tape.
I had written all that, but I wasn't sure if all of that was accepted by the, okay, thanks.
Okay, no further discussion? All right, Ms. Dow, could you please take the vote?
Chair Chang,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rectal,
Yes.
Commissioner Aiken,
Yes.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Commissioner Liu,
Yes.
Commissioner Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Okay, great. So I think that means that we are done with this agenda item. This moves us on to commissioner questions, comments, announcements, or future meetings and agendas. This is where if anybody did have questions about the RRP, we could raise them now. And staff won't be answering the questions, but can eventually get us answers. Commissioner, is this a ghost light or Commissioner Liu?
Yes, I'd like to flag a question about related tenant protection programs from our housing element. So in program 6.6 of the housing element, we list out a number of tenant protections with a completion date of June 2024. Some of those I know are complete, but others I'm unsure of. Some of those reference communication and like identifying funding and things like that happen on the back end. And some of that also refers to an ordinance requiring 90 days notice for a 6% rental increase instead of a 10% rental increase. So I just would like follow-up and confirmation of the status of the renter-focused housing element programs, since I really see them as a package that all kind of goes together with the RPP spiritually. Yeah.
Okay. We have Commissioner Suma and then Commissioner Templeton. And
If, I would appreciate if staff could find the methodology that was used to create the circles. And they could just share that with us. Thank you.
Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reiterate that my August away dates are the 19th through the 23rd now. So I will be here for the 14th. Yeah, if anybody wants to talk to me about what I'm doing, and I'll be in Chicago. Thank you.
Commissioner Heckman.
So in our director's report at the beginning of the meeting, we didn't get a report from transportation, but there was a reference to transportation will be here at the end of the meeting. So if there's a transportation question, ask it then. And so is Mr. Baird still here?
Uh-oh. It looks that he dropped off.
Okay.
But I can convey that question.
Okay, well, it's the same comment I had last time, except I wanted to confirm that the transmission worked. We now have the May traffic data, which shows injuries. And I want to encourage transportation staff to contact the police department, who I understand issues that report, I think, to find out if they can break out fatalities, this combined category of fatalities and serious injuries, significant injuries, I can't remember the term, because that's what we are supposed to be reducing to zero in the next number of years. And so, you know, it would be great if that information can be included. So I would just like, hopefully at our next meeting, which isn't for a month now, right? We'll hear from transportation that they've talked to the police department and they're working on doing it, or it can't be done, and here's why. All right. So that was the transportation comment. And the other comment I want to make is, and this is not staff's doing, but I'm noticing that our transcribers are falling seriously behind in producing minutes. And, you know, it's a problem because they're going to stack up for us, which, you know, creates more work for us. But I think the bigger problem is our recommendations go to council faster than the minutes are being produced. And so they're going to council without even our summary minutes to look at. And so there's no way for council to get the gist of our discussions unless they're going to watch the whole video, which is not realistic to expect them to do that. So I'm sure this is a concern of staff's too, and I don't need to get into the details now, but whatever you can do to light a fire under our transcribers or hire new ones or replace the service if they're inadequate, let's see if we can catch up. We got a break here, right? Council will take a break. And so let's see if we can catch up on those. Thanks.
Yeah, it makes it difficult even for this meeting because we didn't know what we ourselves said.
Exactly.
So there was, I have a request for a future agenda item, which is I know that we are not discussing tonight the residential registry program, but, and I know that there is not the opportunity to see it again before the council ad hoc sees it. But because this program is going to go live in October, I'm really hoping that it can come before the entire PTC again, because the last two times that the PTC voted on the residential rental registry program, which was once when we were looking at a whole host of renter protections, and then second, most recently when we forwarded the recommendation to have one to council, that we all wanted to see the questions because it was so difficult for us, and we agonized over enacting many renter protections because we didn't have any data. And so we wanted to make sure, as this body that had spent a long time deliberating over all the various renter protections, that we were also gathering the right information. And so I'm hoping that the questions can be brought before the PTC so that we can give cohesive feedback to the consultants that are preparing that. There's also a whole host of questions that I have, like how are we enforcing it? How much are the program fees that we're charging? How much time is required for the initial registration and for an update, as well as will there be online training for people? There's going to be in-person training, it says in our packet, but will there be online training? So that's just my request. Commissioner Templeton.
Thanks. Well, if we're given requests, I have a request. I was at the wonderful 4th of July barbecue, a chili cook-off this weekend, and I talked to some constituents there. And one of them, it's too bad Nathan is gone, because one of them was talking about the parking permit program in downtown, and that it was they've identified some areas for improvement and want to have a chance to give feedback and don't know exactly how to do that. And I wonder if we do any kind of periodic check-ins on those permit programs, even if it's a study session or even how we're getting feedback from constituents. So I would love to hear more about that next time, maybe. Thanks.
I think that we are adjourned. Thank you.